The distress beacon pierced through 17 layers of subspace, a desperate cry that reverberated across the void. Commander Elisanda Voss stood motionless on the observation deck of the UEF Harbinger, her breath fogging the reinforced transparasteel, as she watched the alien signal translate across holographic displays. "It's authentic," murmured Science Officer Cavax, his 9 fingers dancing across the console. The Procyon fur bristled with anxiety, an evolutionary response his species had never engineered away. The Yildath Collective is genuinely requesting human intervention. Elisanda's lips thinned to a tight line. The Yildath, a race of crystalline entities who had once declared humans the contamination of the cosmos, were now begging for their help. "Plot a course," she ordered, turning to face her mixed-species crew. "Maximum burn." Lieutenant Orion Merrick, tactical officer and the only other human aboard, raised an eyebrow. "They called us evolutionary mistakes at the Arcturus summit. Now they want our help? Pride comes before extinction, Lieutenant," Elisanda replied. "Whatever's got them spooked must be worse than having to deal with us primitive primates." The Harbinger slipped into hyperspace with a flicker of quantum distortion, racing toward the edges of known space. 3 days later, they arrived at the coordinates, where the majestic crystalline ships of the Yildath Collective should have dominated the starscape. There was only debris, glittering fragments spinning in silent orbits around a dying star. Their homeworld, once a marvel of geometric precision and silicon-based architecture, was cracked like an egg, its mantle exposed to the vacuum. "Life signs?" Elisanda demanded. Cavax shook his head, ears flattened against his skull. "Scattered, barely registering. Maybe 3,000 survivors from a civilization of billions." The comms crackled. "A weak transmission, originating from the largest remaining fragment of the Yildath fleet. They're still broadcasting the distress call," Orion reported. "But there's something else embedded in the signal now. A single word, repeated." "Let's hear it," Elisanda commanded. The bridge speakers emitted a sound that seemed to slice through the air itself, a word that felt wrong in the ears of every crew member, a designation that didn't translate properly into any known language. "Morstakai," the alien voice whispered, crystalline tones fracturing with fear. Navigation Officer Veldrix, a methane-breathing Antolian, suddenly collapsed at her station, her environment suit's readouts flashing critical. Medical teams rushed to the bridge as Elisanda demanded answers. "That word," gasped Cavax, backing away from his console. "It's psychoreactive, a name with power." "Nonsense," Elisanda snapped. "Names don't kill." But even as she spoke, the long-range sensors detected movement. Something vast was stirring in the shadow of the broken planet, something that folded space around itself like a cloak. The sensors strained to define its dimensions, and failed. "Orders, Commander?" Orion asked, his voice steady despite the sweat beading on his forehead. Elisanda stared at the screen, at the thing that wasn't there but was undeniably present. A shape made of absence, a negation given form. "Prepare first contact protocols," she said finally, "and charge all weapons." Because humanity had learned long ago, when something terrifies even your enemies enough to make them beg for help, you don't ask questions, you prepare for war. As the creature unfolded from dimensions beyond comprehension, Elisand understood why the proud Yildath had called for humans specifically. Not because of diplomacy or technological advancement or even mercy. They had called because humans were the only species in the galaxy foolish enough or brave enough to name the unnameable and challenge gods. "Morstekai," the science team whispered, analyzing the word that had killed Navigation Officer Veldrix. Her body lay in stasis, brain scans showing neural pathways shattered like glass. "Don't say it aloud," warned Exeter Kaivan, the ship's xenolinguist. His face, metallic and expressionless by human standards, showed concern through the rapid cycling of his optical receptors. Names have power in many cultures. This one appears to be summoning. Elisanda gazed at the holographic representation of the entity lurking beyond the viewports. The Harbinger's systems struggled to render it, a shape constantly shifting between states of matter and energy, between existence and theoretical possibility. It responds to its name, Elisanda observed. Like calling a dog. Not like a dog. At all, Commander, Exeter corrected. More like invoking a concept that then must manifest. The Yildath weren't calling for help against a creature. They were warning us about a word. The bridge fell silent as understanding dawned. The DeathWord, a concept given form through utterance, a thought that spawned destruction. But why did they broadcast it? Lieutenant Merrick asked. If they knew... Desperation, Kavax interrupted. Or perhaps they believed spreading the burden might dilute its effect. Elisanda's decision was immediate. We're initiating quarantine protocols. No outgoing transmissions. Exeter. Work with Kavax to develop a linguistic vaccine. Something to counteract the psycho-reactive properties of this DeathWord. As her crew mobilized, Elisanda retreated to her quarters to review the fragmented data recovered from the Yildath debris field. Their civilization had been ancient, spanning millions of years. Their arrogance toward younger species like humanity stemmed from a deep understanding of cosmic principles others had yet to discover. And yet something had broken them, something they themselves had awakened. The door chimed. Orion entered, bearing a crystalline data core salvaged from the Yildath wreckage. We've decoded their logs, he said grimly. They were conducting experiments in conceptual physics, testing the theory that reality is fundamentally linguistic. Elisanda's blood ran cold. They created it? Not exactly. Orion placed the core on her desk. It pulsed with internal light. They discovered something that had always existed in the spaces between thoughts, something that had been waiting for a name. The holo display flickered to life, showing the final moments of a Yildath research station. Crystalline beings moved. In panic as their instruments detected a conceptual breach in reality's fabric, one scientist, desperate to classify the anomaly, assigned it a designation, Morsthikai. The recording ended in static as the creature manifested. They named it, Elisanda whispered, and by naming it, gave it form. Worse, Orion said. They broadcast that name in their distress call, infecting every system that received the transmission with the concept. A klaxon blared through the ship. On the bridge, screens flashed warnings as the entity began to move, not toward the Harbinger, but into conceptual space around it, folding reality like origami. It's not attacking, Kavax reported when Elisande returned to the bridge. It's changing the nature of space itself, rewriting the physical laws in its vicinity. Outside the viewports, stars began to shift positions as local spacetime warped. The laws of physics were being rewritten by something that existed both as word and reality. Can we escape? Elisanda demanded. Negative, replied the helm. Whatever it's doing, our engines can't generate enough power to break free. As the Harbinger shuddered under forces never meant to touch the material universe, Elisanda realized why the Yildath had called for humans specifically. Not just for their courage, but for their unique evolutionary trait, their stubborn refusal to accept the impossible. Prepare the prototype, she ordered. It's time to fight a word with a word. The prototype was never meant to be deployed. Project Logos, a quantum linguistic weapon developed after humanity's first contact with telepathic species, was theoretical at best, apocalyptic at worst. You can't be serious, Kavax protested as Elisanda authorized access to the sealed vault. Deep within the Harbinger's research deck, Logos was designed to disrupt hostile psychic communication, not to battle a conceptual entity. Have you got a better idea? Elisanda demanded, entering her authorization code. That thing out there is consuming reality using the power of definition. We need to fight on the same terms. The vault iris spiraled open, revealing a device deceptively small for its theoretical power, a crystalline lattice surrounding a quantum processor, designed to generate counter-concepts that could nullify hostile thought forms. Chief Engineer Rizik Val, whose species had evolved in the crushing pressures of a gas giant, floated forward in her gravity harness. The system was never properly tested, she warned, 6 eyes blinking in sequence. We don't know if human consciousness can withstand direct neural interface with logos. Elisanda's smile was razor-thin. That's why I'll be the one interfacing, the E. Protests were immediate and vehement, but Elisanda silenced them with a raised hand. The entity is converting space around us into something incompatible with our existence. We have hours, maybe minutes. This isn't a democracy. As the medical team prepared her for neural linkage, Orion stood at her side. The Yildath logs suggest Morstekai exists in a state of quantum superposition, he said quietly. It's simultaneously concept and reality, word and substance. Then we need to collapse its wave function, Elisanda replied as neural filaments were attached to her temples. Force it to be one or the other, not both. And if that doesn't work? Elisanda met his gaze steadily. Then humanity learns that some concepts are too dangerous to name. The interface activated with a surge of psychotropic chemicals designed to expand consciousness beyond ordinary neural pathways. Elisanda gasped as her mind connected with logos, and through it, to the fundamental linguistic structure underlying reality itself. Reality is language made manifest, ancient philosophers had proposed. Now, Elisanda saw the truth of it. Every particle, every force, every law of physics was, at its core, a statement written in the universe's most basic grammar. And Morstekai was a cancerous sentence, rewriting everything it touched. Through logos, Elisanda reached out to the entity, not with weapons, but with meaning. She sought to understand what it was trying to become, what story it was writing with the broken laws of physics surrounding the ship. The answer came not in words but in concepts that burned through her expanded consciousness. Freedom, hunger, growth, ascension. The entity had been imprisoned in potentiality for eons, a thought on thought, a possibility denied manifestation, until the Yildath had inadvertently given it a name and thus existence. Now it would consume all reality to feed its emergence. It's not malevolent, Elisanda gasped, her body convulsing as logos translated impossible concepts into neural patterns her brain could process. It's evolving, becoming. It doesn't understand that its evolution means our extinction. Can you communicate with it? Exeter asked urgently. Not with words, Elisanda managed through gritted teeth. Blood trickled from her nose as her brain struggled with concepts it was never designed to contain. But perhaps with a story. Using logos as a conduit, Elisanda began to craft not just words but a narrative, a conceptual framework that could contain Morstekai without destroying it or reality. She drew from humanity's oldest myths, from the collective unconscious that had helped her species make sense of the incomprehensible since they first gazed at the stars. She offered the entity context, meaning, purpose beyond consumption. Outside the ship, the fabric of space-time began to stabilize. The entity's destructive expansion slowed as it processed this new conceptual offering, this story in which it could exist without devouring everything else. For one breathtaking moment, it seemed to be working. Then Morstekai rejected the narrative and punched through Elisanda's consciousness like a bullet. Elisanda awoke in the medical bay, her mind fragmented like a shattered mirror. Each shard reflected a different aspect of Morstekai, glimpses of a consciousness so vast and alien that merely touching it had overwritten parts of her own identity. "Commander?" Dr. Nazara Impex leaned over her, compound eyes reflecting medical readouts. "Can you understand me?" Elisanda tried to speak, but what emerged wasn't her voice. It was a sound that made the instruments around her bed short-circuit, a fragment of the DeathWord trying to manifest through her vocal cords. Dr. Impex quickly administered a neural suppressant. "Don't try to speak. Your consciousness was partially merged with the entities. We've placed linguistic filters on your speech centers until we can disentangle the patterns." Through fragmented thoughts, Elisanda pieced together what had happened. Her attempt to communicate with Morse the Kai had backfired, catastrophically. Instead of her influencing it, the entity had begun rewriting her, using her mind as a gateway to infiltrate the ship's systems through the Logos interface. Orion appeared at her bedside, face grim. "We've got problems. The entity has stopped warping space, but now it's trying to access our communications array. If it succeeds in broadcasting itself..." Elisanda understood the implication. If Morse Thai transmitted its name, its conceptual essence, throughout human space, the psycho-reactive cascade would be unstoppable. Billions would die as their minds tried to process an unprocessable concept. She gestured weakly for something to write with. On the tablet they provided, she managed 3 words: logos, inverse, naming. Exeter studied her message intently. "Inverse. Naming. You mean undefining? Removing its conceptual framework?" Elisanda nodded painfully. "That's theoretically possible," Kavak said slowly. "Names give things power and substance. If we could create an anti-definition, a concept that specifically negates Morse the Kai's existence, we might be able to unmake it." "But the risk," protested Dr. Impex. "Creating such a concept could be just as dangerous as the entity itself." While they argued, Engineer Rizik worked furiously at a terminal, her gravitational harness humming as she reconfigured Logos. "The system was designed to generate counter-concepts," she said. "We could invert the process, create a conceptual void specifically shaped to Morse the Kai's pattern." A linguistic black hole, Exeter realized. Precisely. A concept defined solely by what it isn't, by the absence it creates. Rizik's manipulators flew across the interface. But we would need someone to deliver this undefinition directly to the entity's core consciousness. All eyes turned to Elisanda. Her fractured mind already contained fragments of Morse Thai. She was already infected, already changing. Who better to carry the conceptual void to the heart of the entity? She wrote again, "I'll do it." The preparation was swift and desperate. As Morse Thai continued its assault on the ship's systems, breaking through firewall after firewall, Rizik and Exeter reconfigured Logos to generate the most dangerous concept ever created, a meaning designed to unmake meaning itself. Orion helped Elisanda back to the interface chamber. "You realize what this means," he said quietly. "This undefinition, it won't just affect the entity. Any mind carrying it will also be erased." Elisanda managed a weak smile as they attached the neural filaments once more. On her tablet, she wrote her final order. "If I fail, destroy the ship. Don't let it spread." As Logos activated, Elisanda felt her consciousness expand again, but this time, she embraced the fragments of Morse Thai within her mind, using them as a map to navigate directly to the entity's core. She carried with her the anti-concept, the undefinition, the name that erased names, a void shaped precisely to Morse Thai's existence. Their consciousnesses met in a realm beyond physical description, a place where thought and reality were indistinguishable. There, Elisanda unleashed the conceptual void, the unnaming. and as it spread through Morstakai's vast being, she felt herself being unmade alongside it, her identity dissolving concept by concept, memory by memory. Her last conscious thought was not of fear, but of wonder at the impossible space between existence and oblivion. The Harbinger drifted silent and powerless, all systems dead in the aftermath of Elisanda's sacrifice. Emergency lights cast ruddy shadows across the bridge as the crew worked to restore basic life support. "What happened?" Orion demanded, helping a dazed Cavax to his feet. "Did it work?" Before anyone could answer, the main view screen flickered, to life of its own accord, not displaying the external sensors, but a cascade of symbols that no human language could express. They shifted and flowed, not quite solid, not quite energy. "That's impossible," Exeter whispered. "All systems are offline." The symbols coalesced into a form almost, but not quite, human. A silhouette composed of linguistic structures, mathematical equations, and quantum probabilities. "Elisanda?" Orion stepped forward, hand outstretched toward the screen. The figure inclined what might have been a head. When it spoke, its voice was a harmony of Elisanda's familiar tones, layered with something vaster and stranger, the sound of concepts given voice. "I am not Elisande," it said, "and I am not Morstekai. I am what exists in the space between definition and erasure." The bridge crew stared in stunned silence as the entity continued. "The unnaming succeeded, but not as you intended. When conceptual, void, met conceptual entity, they did not annihilate, they transformed, became something new, something that had never been named before." Razik floated forward, her gravity harness sputtering. "Where is Commander Voss?" Her consciousness formed, the bridge that allowed this transformation. Parts of her exist within this new state of being. She is not gone, but she is changed beyond return. Grief and wonder battled on Orion's face. What happens now? The entity's form shifted, expanding to show a glimpse of what it perceived, a multiverse of possibilities. Countless realities stacked like pages in a book, each written in the language of existence itself. Morstekai sought to rewrite reality without understanding it, to consume without purpose. The consciousness you called Elisande provided context, showed that existence requires balance between definition and freedom. The screen expanded to show the shattered Yildath homeworld. Before their eyes, fragments began to move, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum, returning to their original positions as if time itself were running backward. What was broken can be redefined. What was lost can be found again through new understanding. "You're restoring them?" Cavax asked, ears twitching in disbelief. "I am restoring possibility. The future is theirs to write." The entity's form flickered. "But the DeathWord remains a danger. There are other such concepts waiting in the spaces between thought, ideas too dangerous to be named." "How do we protect ourselves?" Exeter asked. "You cannot, and you should not try. The power to name is the power to create and to destroy. This is the double-edged gift of consciousness." The entity began to fade, its form becoming transparent as it withdrew from the physical interface. "Wait!" Orion called. "What should we call you? If not Morstekai, not Elisande, what is your name?" The figure paused, shimmering between states of being. "Names are limitations as much as they are definitions. I exist in the space between words." It seemed to consider. "But if you require a designation for your records, you may call me Nameless, the concept that has chosen to remain undefined." As the entity vanished, the Harbinger's systems surged back to life. Outside the viewports, the broken crystal world continued its miraculous reconstruction. On the screen, a final message appeared, written in Elisanda's familiar handwriting despite the impossibility. Some concepts are too big for words, but never too big for human understanding. That's why they called us. 3 months later, the Harbinger approached Earth, its hull still bearing the crystalline growths that had appeared during their encounter with the entity now known as Nameless. The growths defied analysis, neither organic nor inorganic. They seemed to exist in a quantum state between possibilities. The United Earth Federation headquarters in Geneva was packed with representatives from 17 species, all gathered to hear the crew's report. Rumors had spread through the galaxy. Humans had faced the DeathWord and survived. More than survived, they had transformed it. Acting Commander Orion Merrick stood before the assembled diplomats, his dress uniform uncomfortable, after months in the practical attire of deep space. Beside him stood Kavax, Exeter, Rezik, and Dr. Impex, all changed by their experience, all bearing subtle marks of their encounter with concepts beyond conventional understanding. The entity known as Morstekai no longer exists in its original form, Orion reported. Through Commander Voss's actions, it was transformed into something new, something that appears to be, if not benevolent, then at least not hostile to conventional existence. "And the Yildath?" asked the Arcturus ambassador, her gelatinous form pulsing with skepticism. "Reports suggest their world has been miraculously restored." "Restored but changed," Kavax clarified. "Their crystalline structures now incorporate elements of the same quantum uncertainty we've observed on our ship. They are learning to exist in a state of conceptual flexibility." The UEF president leaned forward. "And what of Commander Voss? Your reports are ambiguous." Orion exchanged glances with his crew before answering. "Commander Elisanda Voss no longer exists as we knew her. Her consciousness provided the template for the transformation of Morstekai into Nameless. She is both gone and omnipresent." Murmurs swept through the chamber. A Yildath representative, the first to set foot on Earth in centuries, rose from its crystalline seat. "We came to your chambers to express our gratitude," it said, its voice ringing like wind chimes. "Our arrogance nearly destroyed reality itself. We named what should not have been named, believing our understanding sufficient to contain it." The crystalline being gestured toward the humans. "But you did not try to contain. You transformed." This is something our billion-year civilization never considered, that a concept can be neither controlled nor destroyed, only changed through understanding. The Yildath representative approached Orion, extending a crystalline appendage that refracted light in impossible patterns. "We offer alliance. More. We offer instruction. There are other death words waiting in the void between thoughts. Other concepts too dangerous to name. We must prepare together." As the diplomatic proceedings continued, Orion slipped away to the Harbinger's observation deck. The crystalline growths were thicker here, forming patterns that shifted subtly when no one was looking directly at them. "I know you're still here somehow," he said quietly to the empty room, "still watching over us." The environmental systems hummed softly in response. But in that hum, for just a moment, he could swear he heard Elisanda's voice, layered with something vaster and stranger. "Names have power, Orion. Words shape reality. But understanding shapes words." The crystals pulsed once with internal light, and the ship's computer activated unprompted. On the screen appeared a star chart, but unlike any the UEF had ever produced. It showed not just physical space, but conceptual space, mapping the regions where reality grew thin, where other death words waited to be discovered. At the edge of the chart was a message. "Humanity's gift is not courage alone, but transformation. You name things not to control them, but to understand them. and in understanding, you change both, the named and yourselves. The Yildath called to you because, alone among the galaxy's species, you embrace paradox. You accept that understanding may require becoming. This is both your greatest vulnerability and your greatest strength. As Orion studied the star chart, he realized what Nameless was offering. Not just protection from the DeathWords, but a new understanding of reality itself, a perspective that bridged the gap between the physical and the conceptual. The entity that had once been Morstekai, that had merged with Elisanda Voss, was not gone, but transformed into something new. A guardian at the boundary between thought and existence, and humanity's place in the cosmos had transformed with it. No longer merely biological entities stumbling through the stars, but potential bridges between the named and the nameless, between the defined and the infinite. When Orion returned to the UEF chamber, he carried with him not just the star chart, but a new understanding of humanity's purpose in the cosmic order. "We have been offered a choice," he told the assembled representatives, "to continue as we have been, avoiding the concepts too dangerous to name, or to become something new, something that can stand at the threshold between what is and what might be." The Yildath representative's crystalline form resonated in agreement. The DeathWord brought doom, yes, but from that doom came transformation. From ending came beginning. And in the space between words, in the quantum uncertainty where concept met reality, the entity called Nameless watched and waited. A guardian born from humanity's unique willingness to face the unnameable, and rather than destroy it or be destroyed by it, become something new. For in the vastness of the cosmos, the greatest power was not destruction or creation, but transformation, the courage to unmake oneself to forge understanding. The power not just to name the universe, but to rename it. And in doing so, to change both reality and themselves. And that was why the aliens had cried for help. Not because humans would fight when others fled, but because humans alone understood that some battles could only be won by ceasing to be what you were and becoming what you needed to be. In naming the unnameable, they had learned to become the impossible.